Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join Flash in our Flash Tube continuing series on supply chain logistics, education, and information and things like that. We are picking up from where we left off last week on the things that we kind of the basics that you know on trade. You guys could just mute for just a second on our panel team. That would be great and get through this. So you guys have joined many of these. You all know we typically will mute you throughout the presentation, but you have control. You can unmute yourself at any time. We encourage you to jump in with conversations, questions, whatever you'd like over the phone, or if you'd like, there's a Q&A tab. You guys can answer questions there or hit the little, raise your hand tab and we'll call on you and of course you can jump in. We will be, of course, sending out this recording in addition to the other one, which we did send out last week, or actually early this week. And you guys can consume that as well as the presentation again. And then a couple things too, we'll be, so Donna Bustani, who you guys get the emails from inviting you to these, she'll be following up with you guys via email or phone just to see a couple of things. One, if there's anything else we can specifically help you with on your journey throughout this. And then B, really to maybe get some more dialogue with you about what else you would like to learn as part of our trade compliance series. And you can also chime in here as well, of course, via Q&A or just throwing it out there, because we'd really like to guide the next 4 sessions of this in areas that you find interesting or would like to learn about. So we're going to do a recap, a quick recap from last week's presentation, just to level set on where we are, and then we'll jump into where we left off. So we've kind of gone through that. So as a reminder, we talked about, really we got through 1, 2, and 3 pretty well, right? So what is global trade compliance, why it's critical to do it by the book, HTS and ECCN codes and how to find them. And really what we're going to pick up today is the importer of record and exporter of record. And of course, when does it make sense to keep things in-house versus outsource, or are there combinations of things? What do those solutions look like? So blowing through, again, I'm not going to go through all this because we kind of went through it last time, but I do want to get to, so unfortunately Tamika couldn't join us today, but we do have, of course, myself, Ryan, and then we have Frank and Van who were with us last week. So they graciously are joining us again today. And then, again, you guys probably know a little bit about us. I'm not going to go through all this. Now, we did talk a little bit about this. I want to bring back our characters from last time and have Frank kind of give us an update on how these cats are doing.
Okay, great. So glad to be back again. And I really enjoy doing these type of things. So we had Ryan and we had Sally. And Sally's program's going pretty good. She hasn't really had any issues. Ryan has had some significant issues that he has to deal with. I just wanted to touch base on some of the things that we didn't have a chance to discuss in the last session on what are some of the things that Sally has done to ensure that she is in pretty good shape and mitigates some of the risk that she may have from a trade compliance perspective. So I want to put it in perspective to give you a little history on this, and then you'll understand where I'm going. So, and this goes back to 1983, actually. So some of you may have still been in grade school. Some of you may have been my age, hopefully not. But back in 1983, the Customs Modernization Act was passed through legislation, and it was attached to the NAFTA bill in 1983. So what that did, basically, it amended all the regulations or the legislation in regards to importing and exporting from the Tariff Act of 1930. So nothing was really done legislatively of any significance since that time, if you could believe that. So there are some significant changes that took place back in the day. And I remember those days very clearly because I was participating in some panels on actually drafting some of the regulations based off the legislation. One of those things is the express regulations for express consignment shipments. That's under Title 19, Part 128, blah, blah, blah. And so that pretty much spearheaded that legislation, and those regulations kind of spearheaded the express industry significantly. And FedEx played a major part in that, as well as UPS and DHL. So what really came out of the legislation? It provided for automation, although there was some automation that was taking place back at that time. There was no legal authority that Customs or Department of State or Department of Commerce had to actually implement the automation that they started working on or enhancing at that particular time. One of the critical pieces is prior to the MOD Act, Modernization Act, prior to that, it was actually the responsibility of the U.S. Customs Service, Department of Commerce, to ensure that the importers and exporters were providing correct classification information, correct country of origin, correct value. There was really no legal authority over record-keeping requirements. So all that changed. They took a reverse course of action on that. Basically, now they came up with two terms, informed compliance and enforced compliance. So informed compliance under the law basically said that you, government, are responsible to ensure that you communicate all the requirements to the importers and the exporters in very clear, concise language, even outside of what the regulations say. And there's publications out there that give you information about specific areas of classification, country of origin, valuation. And one of those items we're going to discuss is reasonable care. So they came out with that, and they took a reverse course. So with that legislation, it now put the burden of ensuring correct data, country of origin, classifications, value of merchandise. All that is placed on the burden of the importer or the exporter. So at that time, there was a lot of scrambling being done. There was a lot of, it was a dreamland. It was a gold mine for consultants because no one really took it very seriously. No one really had to really do anything. Now they had to put all these programs together to ensure that they're providing the correct information. And if you didn't, then Customs would take their enforced compliance. So we talked about the enforcement arm of the government agencies to, okay, now if you did not do what you're supposed to do, now we have the legal authority to issue penalties on that. So one of the things is reasonable care. And so Sally, she maintained and developed her compliance program under the reasonable care standards. And there is a published government document that outlines what are some of those items that an importer or exporter should do. I just wanted to touch on a few of those. Do you have a responsible and knowledgeable individual in your organization that's familiar with all the regulations? Do you have a compliance program in place? And do you follow that compliance? There's nothing worse than having a policy and procedure on compliance, and there's nothing worse than not following that. At the end of the day, you're better off not having a policy and procedure in place if you don't follow it. Because if you end up getting any penalty action or it's a discrepancy, and it's found out that you did not follow your policy and procedure intentionally, then it makes the case a little bit more difficult. Do you have proper procedures in place to ensure accurate classification, valuation, country of origin of your merchandise? Are you familiar with valuation laws and regulations, including valuation methods? And perhaps there may be a session on valuation methods, which I taught that, and that was an entire semester just on valuation. And also, do you reference the informed compliance publications on reasonable care? So those are just a few of the things that Sally has taken on to help mitigate any circumstances. So the government realizes that no one's going to be perfect. And so if you have an error, you get a penalty. First of all, if you have a good compliance program in place, you're going to discover that violation or that error. Now a decision needs to be made. Do I file a voluntary disclosure on that? Do I disclose to government that, hey, I screwed up. This is the reason why I did. And however, I do have a program in place, and it just kind of fell through the cracks. If you do a disclosure prior to the customs service or Department of Commerce, whoever issued you that violation, or whoever would be issuing that violation, if you filed that disclosure prior to that government's discovery, you have a very good opportunity to mitigate or have that penalty, canceled, and a penalty may not even be issued. However, if it's discovered by government prior to you disclosing it, you can no longer disclose it. You're dead in the water, and it happens. It happens. So when you get the penalty action, you could probably mitigate that to a significant reduction. So in other words, if you get a $50,000 penalty, and I've had some of these cases in the past myself, if you're able to demonstrate that you demonstrated reasonable care and you acted on due diligence, you can very well likely get that $50,000 penalty reduced to maybe only $1,000, or even possibly canceled. If there's no repetitiveness in violations, you're really in pretty good shape to mitigate that. Now, Ryan probably did not have a program in place, so he may have gotten the penalty, which kind of eliminates the significant amount of possibility for him to mitigate that penalty amount.
So Frank, if I may jump in here. So really summarizing this, it sounds like if you try, right? If you try to follow, general, best practices as outlined by, the government, which we'll share that link with you guys in the follow-up email. If you try, you have a good chance of, being okay or in better shape than as if you didn't try, right? So again, for my brain, it's more like, okay, so there's a set of standards out there that we can ultimately follow to the best of our abilities, and we'll probably be okay. And if we do make a mistake and we're clean about it, we'll be in better shape than poor Ryan over here who didn't try at all.
Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty much on this particular slide. That's what I wanted to just touch on those points.
Yeah, and I think too, and team, our guests on the call here, if you guys think that you would like to learn more about reasonable care and sort of the approach around that, let us know, because that's something we can weave into our the next couple webinars here and there. So I'm going to move things a little bit through here. So between Van and Frank, just a quick summary, right? A recap of what these are and sort of the importance of them.
Okay, Van, go right ahead. I'll let you.
Sure. So I'll give from a customer perspective. So a couple of things we work with the new clients or existing clients. And so for the new clients, when we sit with them to onboard them into the Flash solution or Flash world, one of the first things we ask for is their master parts list. And that master parts list contains a lot of important information that allows us to inventory control their parts, ship it, inbound it, and more importantly, export it, and export it the right way. A couple of the things, important items that you see here, HTS, ECCN, and country of origin are 3 mandatory fields that we ask customers to provide us because this, and Frank will go into what it is and the reason why we have it and what it really stands for, but it allows Flash to be able to create your commercial invoices. It also allows us, if it's the part is $2,500 in value or more, that we can file AES on your behalf, which obviously is with the government. And just to ensure that we are kept in compliance and kept you in compliance to prevent any delays in customs when it gets into that country of destination. For existing clients, they already went through this process, and what they continue to do is add parts to their network. And as they add those parts, they also provide us with this information. What Frank and his entire team does is they take that part, all the information that you provide us, and they validate it for us. We're not responsible to classify you, but we're more responsible to ensure that what the information you give us does match that part. And again, it protects the customer and prevents customs delays, red flags, customers being blacklisted when it gets to country, or more importantly, your shipments being seized and you blacklisted by customs. So trading compliance folks, that's what they do when they receive this information. So Frank, if you want to go into each one and at a high level, just explain what the HTS, ECCN, and country of origin stands for.
Sure. So a couple of points that I didn't make on the last session. So the HTS, Harmonized Tariff Schedule, for U.S. export, and when you're required to file through the automated export system through ACE to the Census, it actually goes to the Census Bureau, but all government agencies have access to that information. When you send that information, you really have a choice. You could send an HTS number, or you could send a Schedule B number. Schedule Bs have been out there for a long, long time. They've always been focused for U.S. export, and the HTS number is always focused for U.S. import. Well, several years ago, it was decided that you can use either or for your U.S. export. And so most, I won't say most, I would say many, I'm not sure if it's most, but there's many shippers or exporters that really stay away from the Schedule B just for consistency's sake, because they not only export, but they import as well. But why do I want to use two different tariffs, two different numbers? Although some of the numbers are identical, but some are not. So for consistency, we have chosen to utilize the HTS number for our U.S. exports. So when the information is submitted to us from our clients, we're looking for HTS, not Schedule Bs. If we get a Schedule B, we'll probably turn it back, and just because it'll be identified as being an invalid number, if it's not also included in the harmonized tariff schedule. So that HTS number is used, and we do populate the commercial if we're creating the commercial documents on behalf of the client, we'll populate that HTS number on the commercial invoice. Now, when it gets to the destination country, our agents will convert that to the that country's tariff number. And if you recall, we discussed last week that the first 6 digits are usually universal. So the destination country will add their additional characters to the number to be in compliance with that particular country. So the ECCN, I'm not sure if I mentioned it last week, but you have an ECCN. So an ECCN can be a dual use product, a controlled part, which would, I'll give you an example, is a 58002 for encrypted items. Either that ECCN number will require a license or a license exception. So 58002, 99% of the time, it's under a license exception, and which is ENC, which basically just stands for encryption. So a license itself is not required, just a license exception. We have very, very, very few clients that actually have U.S. export licenses. Now, we do have clients that have licenses, European dual use licenses. Any controlled product moving out of Europe, outside of specific countries, and I won't get into that deal. There are exceptions to that. It does require a license, and we maintain that license information when we're moving product out of Europe to one of those destinations that require an export license. Country of origin, we touched on that last week as well. Without getting into country of origin determination, which could be rather complex based on the manufacturing processes, if you're moving a product from one country to another to be reworked, changing the essential character of the product could very well change the country of origin. But that alone could be hours of discussion just on that. So why do most countries need the country of origin? So I can tell you in the U.S., the country of origin, it drives some factors. Is when you look at the harmonized tariff schedule, there's a column in the schedule that identifies those countries where the United States has free trade agreements with. And if that particular product was manufactured in that particular country where we have a free trade agreement, you will either have a reduced rate of duty, or there will be would be usually duty free. Now, there's certain requirements that you need to fulfill to take advantage of that provision. There's some documentation requirements, some information, et cetera, et cetera. But but that's one of the reasons why the country of origin is significant if you want to take advantage of any of the duty reduction programs or free trade agreements that are out there. And as well as every time you go into Walmart, you go in a store, you pick up a product, you're usually going to see a country of origin marking on that product or on the packaging of the product. If you don't see a country of origin marking on that product, it's probably manufactured in the U.S. Anything manufactured in the U.S. is not required to have a country of origin marking. But the intent of that is to let the consumer make a choice. If he doesn't want to purchase a product manufactured in a particular country, he can look at that marking on the product and say, no, I'm not buying product from this country. I'm gonna choose something else. So that's the second reason why the country of origin requirement is there. Any comments, Dan or Ryan or?
No, I don't have any. I know we went into it pretty lengthy last time, so of course, if anybody has anything we can cover, that's sort of why we're recapping in case we missed any of your questions last time or you've thought of more. So I think we can move on a little bit. So this is really where we left off last time. It's really importer of exporter. So we're going to go through a little bit about who they are, what it means, and especially, you know, from Van's perspective, well, obviously Frank too, but Van's perspective, looking through the customer eye, what does that look like? And we get a lot of questions, you know, being in the marketing team, it's like, well, how do you set that up? Do I have to be the entity? Can you be the entity? So there's a lot in there. So we're going to just start with big picture. What are they? So you guys can kind of go back and forth here and let us know what's going on.
Yeah, sure. Frank, you want to start in terms of the reason, the definition, and I can go into, you know, my perspective and what my clients usually ask for, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. So importer of record, basically that identifies the party who is responsible for the payment of duties and taxes, the documentation that's submitted to the customs authorities. That's the party that is liable and responsible to the customs authorities. So, for example, in the United States, an importer of record is required to take out a surety bond. And the surety bond basically acts as an insurance policy where in the event you don't pay the appropriate amount of duties on time or you get some penalty action, you don't pay the penalty, they're going to go against your bond. They're going to go against the surety company. So it's really an insurance policy. But it is required to be designated as the IOR, which we refer to, is you have a surety bond, as well as either if it's an individual, it'll be a social security number, or a corporate EIN number, IRS number, and that just allows customs authorities to identify the party to the transaction as to who is the importer record, and that pretty much is really it in regards to that definition. From a customer perspective, I'll let Van kind of expound on that. But
Yep.
I can tell you that in some countries it would be when we set up that program, it would be our customer that would be designated as the importer record. Or for example, in India, our agent is considered the importer record. So it does vary from country to country, but you would find that in all the documentation that we have that we provide the customers on the country requirements.
Yeah,
so Van,
you're right. Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny that you just brought it. So country to country, right? So it depends on and we always say every time someone brings up a Brazil or India or Taiwan, I cringe because I know what they're in for. So one of the reasons why they approach us for IOR, EOR services, not only they don't have the local knowledge, right, which is what we are here for. We provide you what we call our playbook. And what that does is that it explains what are the requirements you need to meet to do business in that country. What are the regulations as it pertains to, say, for example, refurbished parts? Is it prohibited? Is it not? What certain HTS numbers might be flagged. That sort of local knowledge and the knowledge from what we can provide is what a lot of our clients depend on. We also have feet on the ground in each one of the countries that we provide IOR, EOR for. So it's always best to have someone with the local knowledge, the lingo, the relationships. So that comes in pretty handy, especially say, we'll use Brazil, for example. We provide the IOR for a lot of clients. We also provide the brokerage. We file the nota fiscals. We know, the ins and outs of how to do business in Brazil. A lot of clients do not, so that's why they kind of rely on us. And also they also learn in the process. Oh, well, I didn't know I can't, import or export refurbished products. You may be able to, but there are a lot of regulations around it. So Frank and the team sits with the client, advise them, with the ins and outs of that. So on the EOR side, it's really important. Clients use this for a lot of things. More importantly, the application for export licenses, that could be very, very tedious. I don't think a client really wants to spend the time and energy to fill out the documentation, go to customs, file it, because one, that they already don't have representation in that country. So Flash, as I mentioned before, we have that local knowledge, we have that local representation, and we've been doing this for so many years. I mean, a lot of clients trust us, and also at the same time, we teach the client. So I just met with a client a couple months ago. They're like, hey, did you know this and this and this about Brazil? I'm like, yeah. They're like, well, you know how I learned that? Is because you guys spent 3 months teaching me how to import into Brazil. And I really learned a lot, but I'm still going to continue to use it for IOR, EOR because it's such a pain in the butt. So that's where we come in. We do all the heavy work. We do all the grunt work for you because, this is one of our sweet spots, like we call it. So it's a very cool and awesome service. A lot of companies offer it, but I know for a fact that Flash does it extremely well.
That's perfect. Perfect. It's Brazil. Brazil is one of the more difficult countries because they change all the time. So your reference as to being a pain in the butt is a very good analogy, actually. So that the applicability of obtaining the license on behalf of the client can take place in specific countries. For U.S. export, when you're moving inventory out of one of our distribution centers to move it to one of our forward stocking locations, it is always the client who is responsible to ensure that if there is a license required, that they actually go out and get that license from Bureau of Industry and Security, independent from Flash. So as the U.S. PPI, we talked about this last session, since you are the owner of the goods, then you're considered the U.S. Principal party in interest, which equates to the same thing as export of record for U.S. purposes. So I just wanted to make that point. There's no, contrary to the import of record requirements, there's no bond requirements to be an exporter of record. There's no formalities that need to be gone through to go through to be designated, quote unquote, as the exporter of record. But you are still the exporter of record is still responsible to ensure that they're submitting correct export data information.
Yeah. So Frank, I just thought about something too. Like I think it was about 4 or 5 months ago. One of our clients decided to, they're like, you know what, we're going to try this IOR thing on our own. And they sent the shipment from the US directly into Egypt. And so using their customer as the importer of record, they did not know that certain information needed to be on the commercial invoice and certain data needs to be in a certain format. So the shipment got into Egypt and it got seized. And so they came back to us. They're like, hey, Van, well, you know, we tried, we failed. Now we need your help to get that out of customs. But one of the things that as part of Frank and the team in Trade and Compliance does is that they review, or we review our client's paperwork before the shipment is actually leaving the US. So going back to Brazil, they have something called the green light process. So we create the commercial invoice, we file the AES, packing list, all of that information is sent ahead of time to our counterparts or our office in Brazil. They review it, they ensure, hey, everything looks cool, copacetic, we're good, we don't see any issues here. Or, hey, you're missing some information, your NCM classification is incorrect. This could cause a red flag, so they push it back to us. So it's a lot of back and forth that we do to ensure once that shipment hits that soil, that foreign soil, that we can fly past through customs and get it into the customer's hands.
Yeah, excellent point.
So, again, any questions for our panelists on these topics? Okay, so that really is about it for importer of exporter of record. Obviously, on all these topics, our team can go deep and wide, which is why we have a continuing series on this and an area to focus on. So for us, really, this concludes the meat of sort of how to get started, what to be looking for, maybe you heard a few things throughout the last couple of sessions of ways you can optimize or improve upon your maybe existing program or ways to get started. So this next discussion really is, when does it make sense to do it in-house versus outsource? And again, as I talked about in the introduction, maybe there are hybrid situations. I know, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but there may be different situations for different types of companies, sizes of company, depends on the resources, expertise, and also risk, right? At the end of the day, trade compliance is a tremendous, risk mitigation arm of the business, right? As you've heard of some of the violations that Frank talked about in our previous episode, it's real, right? So how do you prevent that? How do you mitigate that risk? So guys, if you could just, if you're talking to maybe one of our prospects and we're going down the journey of figuring out if trade compliance makes sense, how do you walk them through that? What do you look for?
Was that to me, Ryan?
Either way, whoever's got it.
I know Frank did a fantastic job the last time, and I actually learned a lot from his statements on when to use in-house versus outsourced. So Frank, this one's on you, and then I'll follow up.
Yeah. Okay. So just like Ryan said, it really depends on the scope of your product line, what the risk is, on to what extent that you want to take some responsibility in-house or outsource that responsibility. So first and foremost is, you realize that if something happens, I'm going to be responsible. So there are opportunities, and you could take it in different levels, right? You can have someone come in there, and there are consultants, there are third parties out there that will come in, and they'll give you the basic tools as to what you really need to implement within your program. They can give you the recommendations, and then you can take on that in-house to accomplish those goals, or you can have that third party come in and actually do the work for you. So it's really it's a decision that needs to be made in-house. But at the end of the day, if you do have, especially if you have controlled product, and I'm just talking right now, I'm just talking for you for U.S. export requirements, and we'll talk about at the destination. But for U.S. export, if you have controlled products, you have complicated transactions, you may want to bring somebody in, kind of give you a really good head start on what you need to be working on. Bring in a trade compliance person or persons to manage your program. You can handle it that way, or if you make the choice to outsource that, you would still want to be very cognizant of the fact that you really need to go back and do a deep dive, at least have an internal audit of some of the work that your third party is doing for you, just to keep a tab on to ensure they're doing it correctly. And most are really good, some not so good, but those are the kind of decisions you have to make.
So Frank, is it because ultimately, so if, for example, I outsource my compliance business to, say, a third party, ultimately I need to revalidate it, although I'm paying this person to do it. Ultimately, I'm still responsible, right? So if something goes wrong, that means that my name and my company's name is on the hook.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it can go as far as the extent of your export privileges are revoked, which very rarely happens unless there's fraudulent activity involved, which is rare. But you can make choices. You could outsource. You might want to say, I just want to outsource my classification, or I want to outsource my record keeping, which you can probably easily do. So you can have a blend. You can have a blend in there as well. So as far as destination is concerned, that's really where Flash comes into play, right? Because our customers do not have an entity at those locations. They're looking for someone to take care of their business on their behalf. They just don't want it. They don't have the personnel. They don't have the brick and mortar in those locations, and they don't want to deal with all the regulatory requirements in that particular country. So that's where they come to Flash. And Vanna could probably expound on that probably a little bit better than I can from a customer perspective.
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned, I think I may have jumped slides without even seeing this one. So the major reasons why clients come to us or to for our compliance program is because they're new to going into India or Russia or one of these countries, and they're like, I have no clue what am I doing. So they bring us in, we do open discussion, we share our playbooks and our knowledge as to how you do business in Russia, what are the requirements, what are the certain licenses, stuff like. It's going to take that client about a good solid 9 months to a year to investigate and go to different departments and websites, and they might still have it wrong, right? Because by the time they're ready to ship, well, that regulation just changed. So what we do, and we do well, is that we're always keeping up with the new regulations. It changes, as you said, Brazil just always changes. They change their mind every couple other months, right? So we keep abreast of all of the regulatory stuff that's changing or evolving, and we keep our clients informed. So when we sit with them, we're like, okay, you want to go into this country? Well, give me your parts list. Let's look at this. Let's look and see, ensure that the licenses you have, the data sheets that you have is sufficient. And the thing that what we have is the knowledge, the local knowledge and the feet on the ground in each one of these countries. So we don't have someone, say, like Frank and myself sitting here in the US trying to, guesstimate how you do business in, sending your stuff into Siberia, right? We have our agents there, we have our partners there, we have our offices in different parts of the world, so we have that local knowledge. So that's one of the major things clients come to us for. Plus, they're like, I really don't, I see it so much more feasible for me to let you do this stuff for me. If you're already doing my transportation and your inventory management, you're already touching my parts, just complete the paperwork for me. Just be my IOR. So that's, you know, that's one of the reasons why they come to us and just let us handle from A to Z. And it's not taking, as you just mentioned, Frank, it's not taking 100% of the liability away from them, because they still, as a ownership of the goods, you still have a lot of liability. So customers do need to stay engaged with all of their shipments and not just leave it to us. Any questions, Ryan? Anyone on the team? Anyone on the panel?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I think this is great, you know, seed planting for our future conversations, right? Because every situation, you know, is going to be different. But ultimately, it comes down to, if you outsource, right, you always have choices, but expertise is one that we recommend you look for, an expertise in this area. Like Man said, there are other providers out there. Some of them specialize in, you know, very different things, especially if you're on the scale and you might be selling items, right? It's not necessarily spare parts logistics. That's an entirely different conversation. The regulations and the control on that side of the building is very different than if you're doing anything with those sales or service logistics parts.
Absolutely.
So it's deep and wide. So, you know, spend some time vetting, you know, somebody you might be looking to partner with, and how they're doing it, who they're doing it for today, and things like that. So that's it from my end. So if you guys have any other last thoughts, we're happy to hear them. And if not, we'll wrap this up and get ready for the next one.